I'm incredibly excited about this one because it's the session that's going to tell you all about supporting that CEO strategy. Essie has such a unique perspective and set of learnings around what it really takes to do that. So I'm incredibly excited about this session. So Essie is Executive Vice President and Chief of Staff to the CEO at AssetMark. Essie's focused on supporting the CEO with strategic and operational initiatives that result in transformational change for that firm. This includes driving programs and plans to support the firm's strategy, including OKRs, obviously, and guiding senior management and administrative staff. Before AssetMark, Essie was at Wells Fargo, I believe, managing strategic planning and execution for Wells Fargo. So Essie, I'd love to welcome you to the stage. And give it up for Essie. Look at you.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. First, let me just give a shout out to my results management leader counterparts. Yes, yes, I see and feel you in the room. Let me just say that program is an amazing program because what we had the opportunity to do is to really kind of meet as different organizations going through this transformation and share learnings, share perspective, really make sure that we had an opportunity to figure out how to navigate this thing. And so hopefully this is just an extension of that. So what I'm going to do today is take you through AssetMark's journey. So our journey has been a little over a year in the OKR space. And I think there's been a lot of themes and some consistent things that have been talked about in the last few days. But one thing I also would say is that every single OKR experience seems to be a snowflake, right? And so what I'm going to do is to share with you our perspective, and hopefully you can pick up some things that can help accelerate your OKR journey as well. So who are we? AssetMark. So we're based in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, Bay Area in California. We are an asset management firm. In short, what we do is we provide the platform and services that financial advisors use to support their end clients. Really, if I give you the differentiator for AssetMark externally, my chief operating officer would say we are client obsessed. We build relationships with our clients. It's not just that we're a vendor and we're supporting them in, with this or that. We actually have long-standing relationships, and that's the differentiator for us. Internally at AssetMark, I think that the differentiator for us is that we have core values, and our organization does a good job of living out those core values. I think it was mentioned that heart is the future. I'd actually like to say at AssetMark, heart is one of our core values. And for people who've been there, I've been there about 10 years, you talk to any of those people, they're going to tell you, the thing that keeps me here is the people, and really the heart of the people. So very proud of that. Just have to give that shout out. So OKRs, how did we begin this journey? So we've gone through a number of different ownership changes, different leadership changes. Last year, we obtained a new CEO, Lou Mayari, came to AssetMark. He's actually a financial services veteran, came to us from State Street. Fun story. So Lou implemented OKRs at State Street and had worked with WorkBoard. I had no knowledge of that. So when he asked us to go ahead and go find a tool and say, hey, what should we use? We did our analysis. We're a very data organization, and what's the criteria? What are we going to choose? And we came back to Lou and we said, hey, we think WorkBoard would be a really good tool. And he's like, oh, I know Daedry. Yeah. I was like, okay, well, then this works. So just a testament to, just really kind of doing the right data analysis to find out what's going to work best for you. But when Lou joined us, he really, he said, who are we as an organization? And he had a remit to really think about our strategy, 3, 5, 7 years onwards. What do we look like as an organization? And what I'll say to you is that, we tended to be, we had these pillars, strategy pillars, sort of vague pillars like compelling technology and, service and experience. And then we went from pillars to projects, right? Sound familiar? And I knew that because I led the program office for many years, and people would come to me and say, working on this super important initiative project thing, but I don't understand how it connects to like where we're going. It's like a disconnect. But that's how we operated. And mind you, we've been very successful. We're a very high growth, intense company. We get stuff done. But there was always the disconnect. And it also led to a lot of silos. Everybody's kind of interpreting it and doing it the way that they do it, and then they have their little tribal knowledge of things and operate that way. And when Lou came in, he's like, not sure that that's gonna elevate us to that next level. So his focus was to really get us to think about our strategy intentionally, and then also bring in OKRs to activate our strategy, okay? So I guess I'm kind of killing the punchline here. I'm telling you the after, which is what some of the things we're experiencing today. We're not perfect yet. We're still on that journey, but 1 year has actually brought us a long way in terms of seeing the evolution of how good strategy and good execution of the strategy, where it can take us. So I know Priscilla asked the question. I just want to get a sense. How many of you are under a year in your journey? Okay. Okay. How many of you like 3 years and beyond? Like, okay. And then how many of you are sort of OKR, but WorkBoard, this is a new tool for you? Okay. Very good. That's very helpful. So what I'm going to share with you is what we've gone through in the last year, both in terms of inculcating OKRs into the organization, as well as bringing the WorkBoard tool in line with that, okay? So I broke this out into 4 stages. And the reality is that it's never linear, right? It's never step 1 finishes and the step 2 happens. It doesn't happen that way. But I thought that this was just a way to organize, how we went through the journey, so that if you're actually building a program or thinking about a program, how you may want to segment the different functions and areas. So first was education and alignment. We didn't know how to spell OKR, right? We did not do that at AssetMark. So it was about, what is this thing? Then implementation. So that's all the work of the program management in terms of both implementing the tool, figuring out our processes, and how do we move forward. And then establishing our operating rhythm, right? So what are the cadence of meetings? How do we need to engage and communicate? How do we actually make this a part of our DNA as an organization? And then finally, maturity and growth. So continuous improvement, making sure that we're continuing to learn, getting things, doing things better, and then making sure that we're adapting some of the new technologies such as AI and embedding that in our space. So I'm going to go through each of these steps and just kind of point out to you some of the unique experiences that we've had and some of the lessons that we learned through that. Okay? So let's start first with education and alignment. So there's a couple of things here that are non-negotiables. And the first one would be executive sponsorship. Okay? You got to get a leader to say, I own this thing and I'm going to support you with this thing. You got to get that leader who's going to champion it from day one and be there consistently to reinforce this message in the organization. Lou's that guy for us. I mean, I think Lou uses WorkBoard more than anybody in the organization, quite frankly. But if you don't have that executive sponsorship and that person or that individual who's really leading from the front on this, it becomes very challenging for those of us who are the implementers to navigate and really get success. So find who your executive leader is and find who's going to actually be vocal in their support of you as you go down this journey. The other thing I'll point out to you, I'm not going to go through all of this. This is all in the deck, but I just want to highlight some key things, is the company's strategy. So as I mentioned to you, we were very kind of loosey-goosey about the strategy. You got to know what your strategy is. Kind of got to nail that because everything flows from that. We spent a significant amount of time last year with our board just talking through who do we want to be as an organization, what do we need to invest in, what do we need to focus on, and really getting clear about that with our board, with our executive team, and with our overall operating committee. We actually had we have an annual session where we bring the operating committee together. But we literally spent, a couple of days just locked in a room, putting this stuff together, people debating, arguing, having the honest conversations to get us to be able to articulate exactly what we're going to focus on. It's foundational. Don't miss doing that. And then the other thing I'll say out here is, leadership commitment and consistency is imperative. I mean, Lou's a great champion, but the executive team has to also be aligned because they're leading the teams that have to actually execute on this. So you have to make sure that those people are bought in and also a part of the journey. Okay? So all this to say, we started with education and alignment. I've got John Doerr's book here because the very first thing Lou did, I think it was like he was in week 2, he sent that book to everybody's home. And so everybody read it as a foundational, just education. And then we supported that with other tools and other, information that's out there. But we had to answer these very key questions. Where are we going? All about the strategy. How do we measure success? Those L1s and really nailing those L1s and making sure that we understand at the overall leadership level, what the OKRs would be. And then who's responsible? As I mentioned, we were intentional. Initially, we were like, well, maybe we should roll this out to all managers, all leaders, make sure everybody's, doing OKRs. And we said, well, not sure that everybody's going to come along, number one, and it's going to be a heavy lift to bring the entire organization. So we actually just started with our core leadership, about 80 people in the organization. We're about a 1,200 person organization. 80 people, and said, VPs and above, all of you are going to own this and you're going to be responsible for driving OKRs as a first step. Model the behavior, basically. Okay? So that was step 1, education and alignment. It was just getting smart about this, understanding it, knowing how to spell OKRs. Next, we went into implementation. So implementation, which is something I think you all have either experienced or will experience, this is when you kind of put the puzzle pieces together, right? This is when it gets interesting and challenging and exciting and all of that. We, at the very start, said, something, we want to do this in a best practices way. We don't want to come out here and just kind of, bubble gum and Band-Aid and, say, hey, okay, here's our OKR program. We really wanted to say, who's the expert in this? Who can actually help us? So this went to the point of identifying our solution, which was WorkBoard. And then ultimately we talked to WorkBoard and we said, we think we need some consulting support. We need somebody who's done this and done this for different companies and can really help us navigate this journey. So we formed a partnership. Wave 9 was the consulting company that was referred to us. And obviously working with WorkBoard and AssetMark, we had a really, really tight execution team, right? We had people who were experts in the process, we had people who were experts in the tool, and then of course we knew our business, the best. So I mean, I have to give a shout out to that triumvirate because the first 3 months, 4 months, 5 months into this, as we were navigating the change, we couldn't have done it without, Maya. I see you in the back there. So shout out to Maya. Mike, he's not here. Mike Doosan, he's not here. He was, we came in, Debbie and I were like, where's Mike? Where's Mike, right? So, we've been, partners in crime here. With the Wave 9 team, Alex is back there. I see him back there. Brian is not here, but Brian also, Reed, it was really a fantastic team of people. And one thing I'll say to you is that when we talk about WorkBoard being, an easy tool, they very quickly taught us how WorkBoard was an easy tool. But it was 2 things. I recognized WorkBoard, you could jump right in and get started and start moving. But I also saw the actual complexity and sophistication of the tool. So we were going to be very intentional about how we rolled it out to our organization because of that. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the lessons learned. The next thing I'll say is that WorkBoard has a lot of integrations, right? A lot of different partners. We really wanted to focus on what mattered the most for our WorkBoard implementation. So the first thing we did was to say, all our people data sits in Workday. How do we integrate that so that we can make sure that we have visibility and transparency across the organization? So that was the very first integration that we did. The goal is to do more as we move through. Also, during implementation, we were really focused on what tools made the most sense at what time. Because as I said, it's an amazing, powerful tool. It can do a lot for you, but you've got to, I kept telling my Wave 9 partners, okay, I need this in bite-sized chunks. I need to crawl before I run, because I recognized that my organization wasn't going to be able to absorb all the change of OKRs and all the change of WorkBoard all in one fell swoop. So we were very deliberate, intentional about saying, okay, guys, hey, there's the My Objectives page. This is what that's going to give you. Here's the OKR alignment view. When we did our early reviews, we used that OKR alignment view to sort of navigate those conversations. The heat map. Here's a one-stop place where you can go and kind of see the full picture of the organization. So we kind of guided them. The core team, along with our partnerships, guided the group in terms of the steps that they needed to take along the journey. The other important thing we did during implementation was be very intentional about communication, okay? As you guys know, when you're doing a transformation, when you're going through changes, over-communication is probably a good thing, right? And so what we did at the very outset was we rolled out a newsletter. We all know that newsletters usually have a time period in which they're effective, and at some point, people stop reading them. But we felt as though the newsletter was an effective way of sharing with our organization, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's where we are in the program. Here's some learning resources. And then also we would get voices of the team into the newsletter in terms of how they were experiencing the journey, how they were experiencing the change, okay? So being intentional about communication, I think, is really important as you're taking the organization through this transformation. We also had our weekly leadership meetings where we would inform. One of the first things we did was educate the executive team. I think Maya actually conducted that early education of that group. And then we established what we call our monthly steering committee meetings. So our WorkBoard coaches, we named that cohort our execution steering committee. And they are basically what I call the influencers in the organization. They represent the different functions, and they're the ones who were sort of the catalysts for change within their individual groups. So they would meet on a monthly basis, make sure they were aligned, and then make sure that they were then evangelizing, I think Terrence used that word, the rest of the organization as a result. And then, of course, the core team. The core team met weekly, sometimes more than weekly. And our goal there was to stay ahead of the rest of the organization. We needed to make sure that we knew what was coming next. We needed to know, how do we navigate, questions or challenges that would come up and stay ahead of the group so that we could respond when and if they needed us as they were going down this path. So, key lessons during implementation. The phased approach, I think, is a good thing. We spent time getting smart about OKRs. In the very first phases, I actually intentionally said, let's not even talk about technology. Let's not talk about the tool. When we first did our L1s, we did those on paper. We met with the executive team and we wrote those on paper to kind of just get everybody situated before we moved them into WorkBoard. And then we started educating people on the tool. And again, as I said, was in bite-sized chunks along the way. Multi-tiered support structure. Again, as I mentioned, we really focused on the fact that, hey, we've got the core team, but then we needed that steerco, and eventually we brought our pros in. I do have to say to you that when Maya first told me about sort of the support model and how you want to think about it, I was like, we're 1,200 people in this organization. We do not have, my last organization was 250,000, so you could get all those people. I was like, people are going to have to step away from their day jobs to do this, right? But what I found over time is that people actually saw this as an opportunity to learn, And also really, we could have people play dual roles. So you could have somebody who's a coach who is also a pro, right? And so you had to be creative, because if you're a smaller company and you have to think about how to support it, you have to really be creative in making sure you're leveraging your resources in the most effective way possible. Okay? The other thing that I'll just mention is that, during our implementation phase, we brought Debbie Naganuba. She's right here. She's like my right-hand sidekick on all things OKR. Get yourself a Debbie, because you need a Debbie who blocks and tackles, stay connected to everyone, is constantly in the data, sort of that point of the spear for the rest of the organization in terms of navigating all things OKR. Her impact is immeasurable in terms of driving the program forward. One of the most interesting things, and I think it was on a previous slide, and I'll talk about it in a minute as well, she came up with the notion of what we called hikers, okay? Hikers are high-impact KRs. Our tendency in the organization, I'll move to the next slide, is that we like to do a lot of stuff. So we had a lot of KR. So if you can look at this, you can see Q1, Q2, Q3. You'll see we had 196 KRs initially. Then we got down to 160. Then 138. And I think we're now at 126. So we're getting better about honing in on what matters most. But one of the things that we needed to do is to say, team, we really, really, really need you to identify the things that are truly going to impact those L1s and help us move the ball forward. So the concept of hikers was born. And it was like, yeah, you're saying these are the things that are most important, but we want you to go a little bit deeper and really identify those real things that are going to move the needle. And in doing so, what we did was cause the organization to focus a bit more. So this chart just kind of shows you a little bit of what we began seeing. In Q2, we had a total 24 hikers, and 71% of them were achieved. And we were like, great. And then when you looked at the broader population of 67 non-hikers, 53%. Still good, but not as good as the focus on hikers. So really just kind of shining a spotlight and teaching the organization about how to better focus. And again, it goes back to what matters most, what's actually moving the needle in terms of our strategy. Okay, so we love hikers. And then, as I mentioned, communication. So the feedback loop for us was super important. We wanted to make sure that, Lou calls it do, learn, do, right? It is go out and execute. You're not going to have all the information. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? But then learn, adjust, make changes, and have tolerance for evolving through the steps, okay? So our feedback loop was really the leadership, the core leadership, the folks who were going through the change and hearing back from them on what was working, what was not working, what we needed to, adjust to. We did an internal survey. I'll get back to some of those results in a minute. And the broader population of folks, and really kind of hearing, how effective they thought the program was. And then we were also going back to Wave 9 and to WorkBoard. And we were saying, we're a competitive group at AssetMark. So we were like, chart us against our competitors. Chart us against other people doing OKRs. Tell us how well we're doing. So that was really a good way to sort of, energize the organization in terms of, here's where we are, here's where we want to get to. Luckily for us, we learned that we're doing really well. It's like, they were like, you guys are knocking it out of the park. I don't know if you guys are just telling us to make us, feel good about ourselves, but it worked. So everybody felt really good about that. So this was implementation. So as I said, the rocky road, I've managed some pretty large, complex change initiatives, and so this was just another one that we jumped into. But I think that these tools and these methods helped us have a somewhat graceful sort of, process. Again, it's not perfect, and as I mentioned to you, the 4 steps are not linear. Sometimes we ping pong back and forth, and we have to go back and reinforce and learn. So that was implementation. I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions, by the way. So operating rhythm. So then this was all about, and this again was kind of in concert with doing the whole implementation. It was about How do we review? What's the timeliness of conversations that need to happen? How do we make sure that we're engaging? We're reviewing our KRs, things that are turning red. Really making sure that people, we're staying atop of them, but really having the right conversations. So, really all about this was all about really leveraging the scorecards. So then we're now moving more into WorkBoard and saying, how can we build biz reviews and scorecards that allow us to have the right conversations? And, and I think we also evolved from, hikers are really super important. So what we wanted to do is to say we have a broader view of the organization and OKRs, but then we hone in on hikers in particular. We want to make sure that every quarter we are actually hitting our hikers because we know those are the things that move the needle. And we spent a lot of time building views and scorecards that actually gave us that visibility. We also surveyed our group and they really talked about the monthly cadence, the rhythm of things, right? So we have a quarterly check-in with the team. We also have a monthly check-in with the team. And it's interesting because, initially what we heard from people is, this is not our culture. We celebrate the wins and we rah-rah ourselves and everything's great and we drive. We didn't do as good a job at looking at the things that are not going so well, right? So when we started having these meetings, people were uncomfortable. They were like, ooh, we're focusing on the red. That's just not what we do. Like, ew, nobody wants to talk about that, right? But we had to really engage and have a conversation about, this is not punitive. It is not to call out, Essie didn't get her KRs done or, somebody didn't deliver. It's really more a conversation about how can we help you? How can we make sure that we're applying all the necessary cross-functional resources to allow you and to help you deliver on your KR? What's standing in the way? That's the dialogue and the conversation that we need to have. So we've had to train the organization. I think we've gotten better. We had our last OKR review last week, and I thought it was a fabulous meeting in terms of the engagement and the dialogue. I'm looking at Heather Gilly is our Chief People and Administrative Officer, so she's involved with all the craziness of the people dynamics. But I felt like, we had kind of matured in kind of having the conversation, and we're continuing to sort of build on that. Okay. And then the briefs. These are Lou's favorite things. Oh my God. I mean, he will print these out on Monday. He'll go through all of it, and then I'll start getting pings. How come this one? How come that one? And then when he meets with his executive team, he's asking those same questions. Again, it's that level of engagement and connection. And I'm really, really excited about the chief of staff AI tools and the bots that we'll be able to leverage, because I think it's going to empower our folks to do this themselves, right? Build a view that you can actually use to navigate the challenges or where there might be areas that you need to jump in to help your teams. Okay. So really the lessons we learn, again, less is more. Step into it. Do not think that you have to, do it all at once. We learned that output versus outcome. I'm sure you guys have experienced this. I talk to people, we go through the OKRs and we talk to people and they're like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm like, this is a bunch of stuff you're going to do. That's not the outcome that you're driving for. So we really have to have those conversations, and I'll talk a little bit about what we've done in that space in a moment. But really kind of making sure that people are focused on what matters the most, right? I talked about hikers. I talked about the core team. Executive modeling, of course, as I said, you got to get your leaders leaned in, and they're having the conversations. When Lou's printing that report every week and everybody knows it's going to happen, everybody's leaned in, and they're getting into the WorkBoard and making sure that they know what's going on as well. Okay? Then finally, maturity and continuous improvement. I'd love to say, we are here, it's done. Yeah, it's not. So we continue to evolve. One of the wonderful things that we're doing in this space I love is, number one, we're cascading OKRs down to L3s, right? So we're now educating our directors and making them a part of the solution as well. We're also, because we've been talking about OKRs at our company meetings, at our various one-on-one meetings, the broader organization is like, what are these OKRs? What's all of this about? So we've set up training for the entire organization to become familiar with the language. Even though not everybody's going to be driving OKRs, everybody needs to speak the language. And you also eventually need to know how your goals ladder up and connect to those OKRs. The most fun thing that we're doing is we're doing a little bit of gamification. As I said, we've got a competitive bunch. And so one of the things that we did was we decided to rate the quality of the OKRs that are coming through. And our criteria was how meaningful is it, how measurable is it, and how outcome-oriented is it. And depending on how you scored there, we built this little, base camp model view. It says my internet connection is unstable. Just want to make sure. Okay, all right, okay. And what we did, what Debbie did really, is to really kind of build this base camp to mid-mountain to high camp. And we took all of our functions and we rated them on the, and of course, everybody's an A student. Nobody wants to get the D or the F, right? So just a little way of sort of, moving people, energizing them about, wanting to win in this race. And, I got to tell you, we put all the grades down. Debbie and I looked at it. We're like, not sure if we want to put the grades down. People are going to get crazy. So then we were like, all right, let's make it fun and engaging. So, you got to know how to do it in a way that people don't feel like, you're calling them out or you're being negative. But it was just a really good, I think, technique. So you got to find ways to speak the language of your organization and, bring them along and make sure that they know that you have high expectations of them during this journey. And then finally, I've already mentioned, the AI tool, co-author. One of the things we've been telling folks is, look, you write your KRs, they're great. That co-author tool is amazing at taking a statement or task and giving you suggestions on what an effective OKR looks like. You come out with something that is meaningful, is measurable, and has an outcome. And then you can tweak it, right? You can tweak it to refine it to be more relevant to what it is that you're targeting. So we move forward. Again, as I said, we're evaluating all the various integrations. We're looking forward to using the chatbots. We are getting more sophisticated about our scorecards. One thing I will share with you is that on a quarterly basis, I actually create a report for the board that's called our Business Value Drivers Report. And that is how we grade ourselves, i.e. OKRs, as well as how the board grades us with other value drivers. And so on a quarterly basis, we're meeting with our board and we're sharing this data and this information with them. So they are leaned into OKRs in as much as we are. And they have a portfolio set of companies that they manage as a private equity firm. And it's interesting because they've mentioned to us that, you guys are probably the most mature in this OKR journey than most of the other portfolio companies that they have. So, so it's gratifying, and at the end of the day, we feel as though this is helping us stay connected to and in tune to our strategy, and as Lou says, activating the strategy all day, all the time. So this slide is the cheat sheet. Everything I just said, this is the cheat sheet. So if there's one thing I'll point you to is to grab this, because this is really kind of puts it all out there in terms of our experience over the last year. Your experience is going to be different, obviously, but this just gives you an opportunity to kind of look at the things that we did, how we reacted to some of the challenges and opportunities in front of us, and hopefully it can be helpful as you navigate your journey. The last thing I'll say is our partnership with WorkBoard has been phenomenal. The commitment, I talked about us being client obsessed. I think you have a little bit of that too, Deidre. Just partnering with the team, and they make everything so seamless. The responsiveness, when we have a problem, the whole implementation cycle was and as I said, I've done some big, hairy integrations and systems. This was by far like the most seamless and just the most connected to our partner that I felt. So great, great experience, and I think you guys have found a great tool to take you on your journey. So with that, that's AssetMark in our OKR journey. How much time do I have to ask questions? Get questions? One? Okay. Any questions? Yes, I see a couple of hands over here.
You mentioned HR before, your colleague there.
Yeah.
How are you using your OKRs to rate or compensate, or what integration with HR have you decided,
Yeah.
given you're pretty far along in maturity?
Yeah, so that's kind of a next step for us. So we initially, so it was actually when we first started the journey, we talked about, how do we connect it? And we started having these very hairy conversations about goals and the OKRs and the process and the connection points. And so we said, you know what, let's get this embedded in the organization before we move forward. But one of the first things that we've done is to really kind of have the OKRs that are listed against all of the leaders get sucked into Workday. So our first step has been that you can actually visually see KRs in Workday. In Workday. But the key thing for us is now to think about how to intentionally connect them up to goals and to the work other groups are, going to be charting their team members on. So more to come there, still early days for us. Mm-hmm. Yes.
How did you flag the hikers within the system?
Yeah, so we actually created a field. So Mike Dewson, where's Mike Dewson? Because he helped us with that. Okay, Sicily's cool. All right. So Mike helped us. I mean, maybe Debbie, you guys can connect and kind of talk to that. Yeah, we used a tag field, and we actually, so we can actually filter everything by every hiker that's out there in a scorecard.
Is that tied to the impact field?
No.
There's an impact field within a KR.
Yeah, we created it as a separate tag field.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just have a custom field. We can show you in the
Yeah.
best practice breakout.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so we've come up with a rubric for people. I mean, we can probably share that. We came up with a rubric to say if it meets this criteria, this criteria. One of the big ones is how does it meaningfully impact an L1, right? So we came up with a rubric so people would look through their KRs and make sure it ticks those boxes before they could consider it a hiker. Yeah. Yes.
Last question. You had 3 ways of rating. I think it was meaningful, measurable,
And outcome.
what was it?
Outcome focused, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you.